I'd like to ask Sandra Neitz to come and join George. So in my brief for this session, George said, just make sure I have nice comfy armchairs, and so that it would set the scene. So we couldn't find any nice comfy armchairs in this building. So he's had to make do with these uprights. I apologise, George, for the uprights. Okay, Sandra and George.
The last session this afternoon is about recovery and is recovery possible? And George and I were talking about this over the dining room table, as we often do, and we decided that rather than George just talking, that it might be worthwhile me asking him some of the questions that we discuss amongst ourselves and which have already been raised today. So, having always wanted to be a television interviewer, I've taken the opportunity to, and I've started off with a few routine housekeeping questions here, George, about things that go on at home, but maybe we won't do that, with the rubbish and things like that. But I thought I'd start just by asking you, and we've touched on recovery a little bit already, but how does mainstream medicine normally define recovery?
Actually, one of the things, we wanted to make this a reasonably informal kind of fireside for Summer in Edinburgh chat. So just to give you, because it might resonate more if you see that we talk about these kind of things frequently and don't often come up with really concrete answers. And I haven't rehearsed anything for this. We just decided on what the questions would be, but it has always been part of my books to talk about recovery, the evidence-based guide to recovery, the 7-step recovery program. I mean, if I look back when I first wrote the first book that I was telling you about this morning, that took me 7 weeks, and I had only had the courage to call it taking control of multiple sclerosis. And I do remember talking to my publisher when I came up with the second book, and she said, we've got to change the name because it's really a new book. How does managing multiple sclerosis sound? And I thought it sounded terrible. And she said, what about coping with multiple sclerosis? And I thought that sounded even worse. And I remember I was standing in the driveway, leaning against the car, talking on the phone, and I just had to come up with something that was more positive than taking control. And I said, what about overcoming multiple sclerosis? And actually, she said, oh, that sounds good, we'll run with that. But actually, you wouldn't believe how much trouble that's caused me. And I actually sat in a session that MS Research Australia ran halfway through last year. I was invited to talk about the difficulties conducting lifestyle research. And one of the senior neurologists at that session stood up and said, look, I think it's dangerous to call your program Overcoming Multiple Sclerosis. I think it's dangerous because what it does is that it engenders a sense of shame in people who haven't been able to follow the program or who blame themselves for getting ill because they must have somehow been living badly. And it actually went against everything I thought and believed. And everything I'd seen in people who wanted some help and wanted to find some hope that it was possible to recover, and I'll talk more about the recovery bit in a second. Because everything that I'd seen suggested that once you gave people some hope and once you gave people a few tools and once you introduced the concept that they might have a chance of recovery, then often people's lives were absolutely changed. because one of the things that held many people back was this kind of this negative mental state and the negativity around this illness that we've seen so much of in the traditional literature, with that sort of sense that you're always living underneath the sword of Damocles that might fall at any minute, and you would suddenly be back to square one or worse, and be worse than you were before, and have terribly disabling symptoms and relapse, and the course would continue to go downhill and continue to go downhill and be inexorable. And it was that sense that seemed to be holding so many people back from actually not even so much dealing with the illness, but just living their lives. You know, I saw, I've seen so many things that have flowed from that negative approach. Women, for instance, who've always wanted to have a family, but have decided they can't because it would be wrong to be a burden to their children, because they believed this script that they were given, that they would inexorably decline, and at some point their children would have to look after them and feed them, and so on. And I actually remember at one retreat, one woman who said, who'd gone back, changed jobs and become a preschool kindergarten teacher because she wanted to be around children. Her name was Rhonda, 2003. And she did that because she wanted to be around children. And she was now too old to have children. And she'd put off having children because she'd been told that she was going to decline early on in the disease process, which had started 22 years earlier, and there she was, fit and well. She was one of those people who'd had a very fortunate course. And it started to make me really wonder about this whole paradigm we paint MS in. And I thought, overcoming MS, sure, has caused me problems, but I thought it would really raise the bar and really confront the issue if I put recovery in there somewhere. And I know the first review of my book in 2010, The Evidence-Based Guide to Recovery, was by a rehabilitation physician in the College of Physicians' own magazine. And he said, any book about MS that has recovery in the title naturally raises all sorts of concerns amongst treating physicians. And so it is a really relevant question. It's a really long answer. But it's a really relevant question what recovery actually means. So, you know, Bill Clinton, do any of you remember Bill Clinton stopping to give curbside interviews for the press out the front of McDonald's and KFC? It was his favourite destination because he was there all the time, and the press knew they'd find him there because he loved his junk food. And Bill had, 5 coronary artery bypass graft or something in his 40s, early 50s. And he eventually knew, when he was told that he wasn't long for this world by his treating cardiologist, he knew that he had to do something about it. So he consulted a physician in the US, a guy named Caldwell Esselstyn, who along with Dean Ornish has done much of the work on plant-based whole food diets reversing heart disease. Clinton adopted a plant-based whole food diet. He's been a vegan now for about 25, 30 years, I guess 25 years maybe. And has had no further operations. His exercise tolerance has improved dramatically. He doesn't get angina anymore. But actually, if you measure his cardiac parameters, much in the way I was answering your question earlier, you can see that the amount he ejects with every pump of the heart is somewhat less than you would expect for a man of his age and so on. So has Bill Clinton recovered? Well, I would argue he has actually. And I would argue you don't have to get completely better for it to represent recovery. And I actually would also see recovery as not an end point, but a process. So that once you start really taking your health seriously, and you start really addressing the things that can improve your health, whether you've got MS or type 2 diabetes or cardiac disease or depression. Once you take that bull by the horns, then the process of recovery starts to follow. And I don't think that's a journey with an end point necessarily. I think the journey is fulfilling, liberating and satisfying in its own right, and many people along that way will come to the realisation that actually I'm better. I mean, without being too much of a physician about it, but being just a person, a lot of us would know when the point comes when we can say, actually I'm better.
So do you think that rehabilitation specialist who reviewed the book struggled with the concept of recovery because he's looking more for a traditional clear endpoint?
I think he probably was. I think he wanted some measurable endpoint, which is what we do in medicine, isn't it? I mean, Sandra and I are both emergency physicians. We have an enormous belief in the power of medical images, in the power of medications, in the power of tests. That's the way we're raised in medicine. So we look for some hard objective evidence. Sandra, in more recent times, as those of you who went to her talk today will realise, has gone much more into talking with people, into qualitative research, into getting a sense of a person's own views and own feelings about their health, about their life. And I'm much more like that now too. And I think a lot of physicians would want to see something hard, but many of us could provide something I think that's more compelling, which is to say that I'm better now. And for me, that's the process of recovery. I'm better now, and I'm better in a whole range of ways some of which I can't even describe. I know I've lost my symptoms. My symptoms went after about 7 years, despite the conventional view that, if you're still stuck with symptoms at, say, 9 months or a year after a relapse, then you'll have them forever. Mine just kept getting better and went at 7 years, and now I'm symptom-free. But I feel so much better. I'm as fit as any 65-year-old I know. I can run 12 Ks. I've run that much in recent years. We regularly do 8Ks together. I swim every day. I can do 1.5 K in the pool, tear up and down. But it's more than that. For a long time now, I've really felt like I'm alive. I'm really alive. I'm really connected with my life. I feel it's authentic. I have conversations with people and they're real. I'm not rehearsing for something that's coming, because the only thing that's certainly coming is death. I want to enjoy this life now, and that's my sense of recovery. And it might mean that you still have a foot drop, or it might mean that you still have some blurred vision, or you might have some pins and needles somewhere. But I think you can still, for many people, they would say, actually, I'm better. I'm better now.
I think one of the things we discussed was, rather than the traditional medical hard endpoints, and we've heard some of them spoken of today, no disease, activity, and NEPAD, and I can't remember what they all stand for. But rather than those, which are very important, those gains that are visible and reportable and celebratable. But we talked a little bit about a slower process that the OMS program contributes to, such as sort of a slow and gradual change in your physiology and what you're sort of slowly building using the program. Did you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things we're not taught very well in medicine. Certainly we're not taught much about nutrition, if at all. They spend a lot of time in vet school on nutrition. If you take your animal in and it's sick, they'll say, what are you feeding it? If we go in and see the doctor, that's not the first question we get asked. And one of the things we don't get taught is that actually our bodies are in a constant state of flux. They're constantly remaking themselves from within. So the body I've got now, a year ago, 98% of the atoms that make up the body I have now weren't there. So it's a new body that I made over the last year. And what did I make it from? Well, I made it from the food I eat and the air that I breathe and the water I drink. There's nothing else that could have made those atoms. That's where they came from. And actually, the molecules and the substances I put into my body determine how my body functions. And we don't get told that in medicine. And so we know that I could look at people in a randomly selected audience, take the membranes of their cells, say their red cells, in a blood sample, look at the composition of the fatty acids in that, and I can tell you pretty much how you're eating. It's that direct a connection. And if you're eating fats that are solid at room temperature, that are like the white on the side of a chop or a steak, then, you know, how much heat does it take to melt that fat? It's certainly not enough heat in your body to melt it. So when you absorb that fat, it's incorporated into the cell membranes, which are entirely made of fat in your body, then they'll be hard and sticky and non-pliable and prone to degeneration, just like that white stuff was on the side of a chop, versus having unsaturated fats, which have much lower melting points. So at body temperature, they're liquid. So the cells behave differently. Their membranes are pliable. So we rebuild our body. We're rebuilding it all the time, every day, from what we eat, largely. And if we put all our faith in the medication to keep us well, it'll only keep us well, if it's keeping us well, for as long as we keep taking it, unless there's a couple of medications for which that's not true, like Lemtrada. But mostly, you've got to be taking it to get the temporary changes. What I'm suggesting is that you change your body in such a way that these changes become more permanent, so that you've got the backup of your body changing to be more functional, to be healthier, to be more resistant to the chemical and pathological changes that happen in MS. To the point where even, you know, you might consider, like I did, coming off the medication because you're so well. It's certainly a conceivable thing that you would get to a point where you say, actually, I've recovered. And I might go and talk to my doctor about this, because it doesn't make sense for me to be perfectly well and taking a medication. Not that that's necessarily a goal, by any means, to get off the medication, but to be perfectly well is a really worthwhile goal. To be connected with your life, to be happy, to have a really good experience of your life. I can't think of a worthier goal, really.
One of the things that's been brought up today about people with progressive MS, despite their best attempts at adopting the program and being rigorous about that sort of thing. And more recently, I know a good friend of ours who communicated with you, who had been well for a number of years, or many years, and had a relapse in the setting of extremely stressful life circumstances. And I think this is an important question for everybody who, on their journey, sometimes they stumble, or, you know, things happen. And I know that our friend expressed a great deal of shame and embarrassment almost about the fact that she'd been so well and now this had happened to her. So how do we incorporate those bumps along the road, those temporary problems that are part of life, and how do we incorporate that into our sense of recovery?
Yeah, this friend who contacted me would be well known to a number of you in the audience. She has quite a significant profile within OMS. And I won't mention who she is, but it might become very clear to some of you who know her better who she is when we get a bit further into this. But essentially, she was diagnosed with MS 9 years ago, and came to a retreat fairly early on after that, took her 2 years to achieve stability on MRI scans so that she had no further lesions. She had the NIDA definition or evidence of disease activity, but more than that, she was well. She felt she was better. And she had enormous confidence in the program. She never actually, despite being unwell for the first 2 years, never agreed to take the drugs. She was very, that were offered. She was quite concerned about their side effects and felt that the program would offer enough. And that was how it transpired. And so her life actually became quite wonderful. I followed a lot of her things that she did. She played a lot of music in the family band, so a couple of her kids were also musicians, and they played at folk festivals, and she released albums. And then I got an email out of the blue, headed communication, and she said, "George, I've been trying to work out how to say this for a while, trying to work out how to write this email, but I've had a relapse." And you could sense that this was just an awful thing for her, because she felt a sense of obligation to the OMS community that she shouldn't relapse, that there were a whole lot of people looking up to her as a role model, that she'd let everyone down by having a relapse. And her mood sounded very dire in this email. But when I read further in the email, she said, the relapse came after, about 4 weeks after my husband went to the UK because his mother was dying, of a cancer she'd had for a while. And she died while he was there. That was the point of the visit. And 2 days later, his father died suddenly, unexpectedly. And he rang me and said, "Dad's just died." And she said, and it felt like something broke inside me, because this was how I developed MS. I got a phone call to say my father had died, and I relapsed 4 weeks later. And 4 weeks later, on this occasion, I relapsed. And I don't know what to do. So I spent quite a long time working out how to respond best to her. And I wrote her a lengthy email. And I probably don't need to go into the details, because what I thought I'd do, having read the response, she, a few days later, sent me a song that she wrote. And I thought we might play you the song this afternoon. And Gary, rushing out of the room frantically, suggests to me that he hasn't prepped the song, despite our lengthy discussions about. Here he is again, Gary. Oh, you're a legend. Thank you. So, are we ready to roll with the song? Okay. Is there an opportunity to play it now, or if not, then we can wind up? Okay, 2 minutes. That's good. So she, I emailed her a couple of days later and said, "Look, I'm really blown away by the song." She came back and said, "Look, I feel like I found my home again. I found my shore again. I'm not drowning." And I said, "Well, do you mind if we play this song in Edinburgh?" Because she hadn't told anyone about this relapse and didn't want anyone but me to know at that stage. So
George has only told his closest friends, with her permission.
So she said, strangely enough, I don't know why, but I feel no apprehension whatsoever about you playing it in Edinburgh and telling whatever part of my story you want to tell. And I have complete faith in you, which is always a nice thing to hear from somebody. So I sent the song over. Gary, in fact, had the words typed up because she's just done it on a home recording machine, pulled out the guitar, started singing, and the mix her voice isn't all that clear in the mix, but I thought it might come across quite well over the speakers if we ever hear it.
But I think one of the lovely things...
But what Gary was planning to do was to send out the words to you at some point as well, so that you can see what she had to say.
I was just going to say, well, I think what the lovely thing about her song is that, and it brings home what we were just saying about that there can be bumps in the road in everybody's life, and there can be relapses, there can be hurdles to overcome, there can be deterioration, there can be all sorts of things, but finding your way through that towards re-establishing confidence and faith is all part of that journey.
And living your life as if you are on the road to recovery, for me, is the important thing. Living it authentically as if you're on the road to recovery. So I think we're ready to hear the song. Once the song's finished, Sandra and I will, in fact, once it starts playing, we'll wander down and sit down off stage and you can listen to the song. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Gary.
We've sung the songs, we've drunk the wine, and his words have helped me more than I can say. And when I'm in trouble, I often turn his way. See, my life's been on a pretty even keel. I've learned to steer my own ship through fortune and hardship, and both feel better when I'm at the wheel. But right now, traveling really well, and if you're going through hell, well, in that case, better keep going. And I learnt all this a long, long time ago, about purpose and mission, and trusting intuition. I even came close to letting go. Did I lose that? I don't know. 'Cause now I walk the floor at 3 a.m. Thoughts come rushing, the weight is crushing. I'm being pulled to safety once again. I think I'll make the show, but I don't know when. And he said, I see this as a minor setback on a journey. You've been traveling really well. If you're going through hell, well, in that case, better keep going. And the antidote to fear is always faith. Believe in the journey, stay true to your learning, and try to keep a smile upon your face. And if you stumble, it's no disgrace. And there are plenty of us with you on that road. Some following behind you, some up ahead to go.
What a day. It has been a pleasure and an honour to spend today with so many open and like-minded people, and in such a wonderful city as Edinburgh in the middle of summer. It really has been a gift of healing in itself. A huge thank you to every one of you for your warmth and your participation today. I'd also like everyone to join me in thanking our incredible facilitators who have so effortlessly woven together the OMS 7-Step program today. I hope you agree that their combined knowledge and deep commitment to sharing the OMS message shines very brightly. Thank you. In particular, thank you to Professor Jelinek, to Dr. Neat and to Professor Hassed, who have travelled so far to be with us today and who bring with them such outstanding experience, personal stories, and a deep passion for sharing this knowledge and work with you. Thank you. I want to give a huge thank you to all the OMS staff who have worked tirelessly last night and today, and will continue to till the wee hours of tonight and into the morning. And especially to Kaz, to Karen, for your incredibly hard work pulling off what has been our biggest and, I hope you'll agree, our most successful event ever. Thank you to you all. I want to thank our dedicated volunteers who look ravishing in their fluorescent green t-shirts. You guys, many of you have been on the journey with us for a long time and bring your passion for the recovery that you've received and the wellness that you have and want to pay it forward. So thank you to you all. And also, I don't know if any of them are here, but a huge thank you to all the staff, the venue staff, and of course to the AV team over in the corner who have been fabulous and even put the song on unexpectedly in the last minute. So thank you. And of course, last but not least, to our CEO extraordinaire, Gary McMahon, your sheer dedication and hard work is what makes all of this possible. Thank you. And so now, all going our separate ways to our busy lives, I hope that you know that you are deeply supported in your choices by our OMS family. OMS is about hope for a healthier life. It's about empowerment to make choices. And it's about community and friendship. Today, I have seen all of these in spades, and so I leave here happy in the knowledge that together we can make a difference. A difference not only to individual lives, but also to the slow tide of change towards a greater holistic approach to MS globally. As the American author Margaret Wheatley said, there is no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. I am honoured to be a part of this community that cares so deeply. Thank you again for coming along today. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.